welcome to the Software Finder Innovator Spotlight series. We're so excited to have you. I think we've been planning this for a while now, and I feel like we've finally gotten a chance to do this. I feel like it's a big accomplishment that we finally reached here. Have you joined the company recently? I feel like Megan mentioned that you joined in the past few
Yeah, we
months.
have. First of all, thanks for having me. I really appreciate taking the time to speak with me today. I recently did join Employment Hero Canada as the managing director, so I'm running the Canadian business.
Awesome.
Employment Hero is a global company, and we've launched in the Canadian market just about a year ago.
So for our listeners who aren't familiar with Employment Hero, what is it and what problem do you guys solve?
Yeah, so Employment Hero is an AI-powered employment operating system specifically built for Canadian SMBs. It brings together everything Canadian employers need to recruit, hire, manage, pay, and support their people. We're really on a mission to make employment easier for both the employer and the employee, and we believe there's a technology approach to that can make the operations of a small business a lot more effective.
And do you also operate in the US?
No, we're not in the US yet. We're in Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Malaysia, the UK, and most recently Canada.
Perfect. And you mentioned small businesses. Are you specifically catering to small businesses, or do you also cater to enterprises?
Our primary focus is in the SMB space. So, primarily companies that are, under, 500 employees. It is the backbone in Canada anyway. It's the backbone of the Canadian economy. We have 1.4 million SMEs in our marketplace, and helping deliver innovation to that group is something that will be extremely impactful to the Canadian market and business owners alike.
Are you industry specific, or do you operate across all industries?
We operate across all industries. We are really trying to help with the fragmentation of all of the point solutions that businesses are using today to manage, whether it's talent attraction and recruitment and managing their team and paying their team, as well as benefits and perks to their organization. That in itself creates a burdensome operating model for an organization. So we're trying to centralize a lot of those capabilities, so it's much easier to engage your employees and manage your employees and pay them on time.
And how would you say an all-in-all solution like that works as compared to, say, separate point solution?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of key benefits to it. One is the in and out of multiple systems is fraught with error. There's manual uploads, there's list batch uploads that you're trying to do to create consistency across each system. So every time a single new employee comes in the business or leaves the business, there's lots of manual work that happens. So having that all in one system that communicates to each other is one key element. And I think the other key piece of it for us is with the kind of transformational element of AI, how your data is stored in your organization and how accessible it is a critical element to how fast you can innovate as a business. And so having all of your data compliant, private and secure in one platform gives you a single source of truth, which allows you to then access that data in a secure way and use it to automate the business and grow things in your business, which you previously were probably hindered by based on either technical ability and or even access to the data.
That makes a lot of sense. So you often describe Employment Hero as an AI employment operating system. What does that mean in practice beyond software that has AI as part of the feature set?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we look at is AI adoption. Part of the idea of it is around either building yourself or working with vendors that embed AI natively into some of the feature sets that they have. A prime example of that for us is something on the front end of your business when you're reaching out, posting job roles and trying to recruit new talent into your business. Today, that can be a very labor-intensive process. You can get hundreds of applicants for a single job, and if you're posting multiple jobs, you could be sorting through thousands of resumes. So there's ways that you can use AI to help match your job description to the resumes that are coming in the business, to free up some of the matching process of understanding who's a good fit to potentially shortlist. If there's missing information on a resume, but you still believe they're high value because they meet most of the requirements, you can use AI to reach out to potential employees and fill the gaps in their resume so that you can create not only more fairness, I think, for the applicant, but also more efficiency for the business as you're starting to try to sort through thousands of resumes. And that's just one of the components in the system where you can use it on the front end. The other aspects are how do you make technology easier to use. So using conversational interfaces where you can prompt with questions rather than the hunting and pecking that's happened, historically of clicking buttons and looking for information. You can use a conversational interface in our platform that allows you to access, all of the aspects of the modules that we have that make employment.
And if a company came to you tomorrow and said, we want to bring AI into HR, where do they start? What are the first few steps?
I think the first step is one, taking a bit of a step back first and having a conversation with your leaders and even your employees in the business on what you're curious about and how AI could benefit the business. Who's using AI today, maybe even in their personal lives or on side projects? Is there skill sets in your organization today that you didn't know that you had? And then understanding what your AI readiness is as an organization. Then you can start to look at the use cases. So you can start to look at where you feel that AI could benefit you, whether it's surfacing insights and information a lot more readily so that you can manage the business better in real time. It could be creating automation in the business. It could be creating agentic workflows where you're creating the ability for some autonomous work to happen in the business. So you can take away some of the manual, repetitive tasks that are really not best designed for humans to interact with. And you can use that capacity then in your business to focus more on growth, dealing with customers, and dealing with things where your human resources are much more valuable in the business. And you can use automation in the business to reduce some of the administrative burden of manual tasks.
And where do you say companies most commonly go wrong when they try to bring AI into HR?
I mean, first, I think they jump into it without a plan. And so there's lots of point solutions and shiny objects right now related to AI. We're in kind of this mass adoption curve or in the hype cycle of technology adoption right now. And so there's lots of things that you can access. But what you really need to look at is what's going to be valuable for you as a business. And also what sort of data that you have in your business and how you keep that data secure and private. A lot of employee data and customer data is PII data, which means that it needs to stay secure and you need to be compliant. And so you want to make sure that you're working with tools that aren't using your data to train their models and that information is leaving your kind of secure domain. So privacy preservation of your data is very critical. And so when you're starting to go through this process of understanding how AI can be applied in your business, you also want to not use free tools that exist in the marketplace where they're training off of your data. You can have very minimal investment in having tools that make sure your data is staying private, and you can test areas of the business where you think there could be high value. And then the other aspect of that is also opening up the dialogue for AI literacy and training. One of the things that we noticed in a report that we just released was majority of the employees that are using AI in their business today feel guilty about using it. And I think the stat was 39% feel guilty about using it and they're hiding it. And so one of the challenges with AI today is opening the dialogue between the employer and the employee so that they can start to explore together where there's applications of AI in the business and make sure that they're doing it in a way that preserves the privacy of the data and also creates some sort of oversight around how we're using it in the business and making sure that you're keeping a human in the loop. You're not abdicating decision-making to AI. You're using it to help you surface insight, build workflows that are more efficient. And then you also have a human in the loop as the judgment mechanism of what's going to be valuable for the business, what you're going to proceed with, and can you validate whether the output of that is accurate for the business before you start to use it at broader scale.
It's interesting that you bring up data privacy because I know that's a huge concern for people, especially in HR. When we talk about the ethics of using AI in HR, we often hear the word AI ethics audit or how companies are ensuring that their use of AI is ethical. What would you say that means specifically? In your own words, what is an HR AI ethics audit and why should it matter to an everyday employee or employer?
Yeah, I think it boils down to some very simple principles. It's about transparency and auditability. And so as you're using data and AI models and machine learning to aggregate information, to derive kind of short lists or insights out of that information, you want to make sure that you can understand how it came to that decision or how it came to that criteria. And so auditability and transparency are very important because that, in essence, is the human in the loop that's able to look at what those guardrails are that you're setting and making sure that you have the ability to check whether what you've built or what you're using is fair, it's transparent, you can audit it, and it's actually providing value for the business, and it's not creating challenges in your business or making even in the application process to your business, you're creating an environment where it's unfair for applicants. So part of that is all just an underpinning of auditability and transparency so that you have the ability to make sure that what you've designed or what your intent was is following through with the technology that you're using.
Was there a specific moment or a specific case where you saw something that made you realize that the use of AI in HR is an ethical problem?
I wouldn't say it's one specific moment, but I think the thing that we're observing in this kind of rapid adoption of AI, whenever there is rapid technology adoption, there's always edge cases that you start to surface as people are testing and trying. And so it's not a very specific moment, but I think it relates to AI literacy. So right now we're not dealing with a massive challenge around adoption. There's a lot of adoption of AI, but the literacy of AI between employee and employer is probably the biggest challenge, I think, right now from a marketplace standpoint. And whether it's HR or payroll or benefits or any of the kind of core systems that are being used in an organization, you really need to start to open up the dialogue and understand how your business could benefit from it, where there's potential value, and start to think about how you will approach that as an organization to ensure that data is staying private, that you're being very transparent in how it's being used, and you're keeping a human in the loop for the judgment of understanding whether something is valuable to the business or not, and is the outputs that you're getting fair and transparent for both the employee and the employer in that process. And so I think the underpinning of it is education. And so building that into part of your core education module in your business, I think is going to be a critical element as we get into 2 to 3 years from now. It's going to be a core underpinning of every business and how they operate.
It's interesting that you bring that up because recently we've seen legislation passed that accounts for AI audits or ethical audits of AI. For example, California now requires AI-related HR records to be kept for 4 years. And I think New York City now requires annual bias audits for AI hiring tools. If a business realizes that it's never audited its HR AI, where should they start? And what's one thing that they could start with right now?
Yeah, I think a good spot to start is regulation and compliance and guidelines usually always lag the adoption of technology. And so you really have to start to take ownership directly yourself before you start to dive in and apply tools. And so understanding and mapping everywhere AI is either being used today or where the potential is to be used today, I think is important in this business. So you have an understanding of what your personal landscape is, of where AI can be valuable in your business. If AI is already being used today, I think that's part of the AI literacy component, because in some of our studies, we found that I think it was 39% of people are hiding the use of AI. So shadow AI is a real thing. And the challenge with shadow AI is an individual wants to help innovate in the business. So they're potentially taking data and information of your business, using a free large language model on a personal account, starting to derive insight or workflows or elements out of that, and then bringing it back to the business. That in itself is something that is taking private data and moving it outside your organization. And so just having the dialogue and the conversation allows you to at least put up some intermediate guardrails that allow you to understand what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And so opening that up, I think, is a critical element of it. And that leans you into the transparency and the auditability of who's using it, how you're using it, and how some of the prompts are designed or the agentic workflows are designed, so that you can go back and have a human in the loop to have almost a gut check of whether the intended purpose of it is driving the output that the business is going to potentially utilize. But you need to do it in a sandbox type environment where you can test and learn before you apply it to the broader enterprise. And I think that gets you to the point where you're going to start to align with where regulation and compliance is going to catch up to some of the uses of AI today.
It's interesting that you bring up the difference between free AI tools versus paid AI tools and how that can ensure data privacy. When people are searching for a paid tool and they're in the market research phase, what are some things that they can look out for that help give them that certainty that this tool will help them protect their data?
Yeah, ultimately, the delineation is probably not just free or paid, but it's understanding whether the model that's being used is being trained or fine-tuned off of your data for other parties. And so that is normally the distinction between whether data can be fine-tuned in your own environment, and you can create a model that can become in essence, more intelligent or more refined versus it being refined to the broader market. And so normally the paid tiers are when you're starting to pay for tokens or processing that is just for your specific use cases. And that normally is the gate in which you want to, as a business, make sure that your data is being used in a secure way. I think the other part of that is working with vendors that already have access to your data. The data is secure, and the data can speak to each other. And so one of the benefits of one platform is it allows the data to speak to each other. It's got similar schema, it's got similar formats. You can use AI across different systems versus disparate systems that don't speak to each other. That then becomes problematic because you're porting data to different systems, and potentially you're bringing 3 or 4 data repositories into one potential free LLM. That's problematic if you start to deploy it in that way. It will slightly. I think what we're finding right now is in the kind of hype curve of the use of AI, the next phase normally after a hype curve is there's a trough where you're finding diminishing returns or diminishing value. And then you start to see an uptake again where the highest value use cases fit well. And I think what we're seeing as we get into use cases across HR and payroll and benefits and those areas, there's a lot of commonalities across multiple verticals because the operating model of onboarding somebody, training somebody, performance managing somebody, paying them, those are all very consistent workflows and consistent data. As you get into very, very specific verticals that, like in the hospitality use case, you might also go into inventory management and a few other components of the business. I think that's the area where verticalization from an AI standpoint, you get edge cases that are being developed from an AI standpoint. But I think in the space that we're in, a lot of the core use cases of a business that can create a 70-80% improvement in time spent in that technology can happen in a core platform because the use cases are so consistent across industries.
And where do you think the HR industry stands right now? Is it keeping pace with the responsibility that comes with using AI this deeply? Or are we just storing up problems that we'll be cleaning up later?
I think with rapid adoption of technology, there is always a push and a pull that happens as adoption is occurring. From an HR specific standpoint, I think the adoption and the use cases are faster than the industry itself is pulling behind from understanding what is the ethical use and what does ethical use mean today as models continually get better and better and better, and there's multiple models in the marketplace. And so I think the most important piece of it is going back to some fundamental first principles thinking of making sure that we're not abdicating decision-making to technology. We have to remember that it's artificial intelligence, it's not intelligence. And so we have to make sure that we can audit it, that it's transparent, we understand what the intended use was, and we can make sure that we're auditing ourselves whether the output of that intended use is accurate. And then we can start to use it in other ways in the business that free it up. But I think as an industry as a whole, creating some best practices and some guidelines and some educational understanding, which goes back to AI literacy, could be very, very helpful for the industry because you're never going to hold innovation down. You need to embrace innovation, but you need to do it in a responsible way.
Is it possible to catch bias in AI before a company starts using it so deeply within their practice?
Absolutely. I think the key thing goes back to not abdicating to AI and making sure that you have I keep using human in the loop. It's really what the technologists call making sure you have a point in time where you can audit it, right? And so you can detect bias very early on, but bias can also be, embedded and get out of control if it's not caught early. So the onus is on you as the business to make sure that you're setting those guardrails early. If you go back to probably 18 months ago, maybe 24 months ago, when AI wasn't the popular topic, the early stage models, there was a lot of news around some of these very large organizations that were building models that there was bias in those models, in the way that they were originally designed and the way that they were being fine-tuned. Now that has kind of worked its way through the system. So the models today are much more advanced. But you can use that same sort of time horizon and thinking about it as your own business. If you're jumping into something with no context and no education and just testing things without an understanding of what it can be and what it could do for your business and where the value is, I think that in itself becomes problematic. You really want to understand what your AI readiness is, open the dialogue, develop education in the business, and then start to test and learn in areas where the data is not private so that you can understand applications. There's lots of opportunities to use synthetic data, so it's not real information, and you can see how it could impact the business. And then probably from an SMB standpoint, one of the most valuable areas is to work with vendors that are natively embedding AI capabilities into the data that they already have access to, that's your data. And that allows you to innovate with technology leaders that are bringing that innovation to you versus having to build it yourself or think about it yourself.
And what would you say to small businesses in niche fields where the management feels like it's just not worth their time to invest in incorporating AI within their company just because of the scale of where they are?
Yeah, I think there is value to be abstracted at every size of company, quite honestly, and to not look at how an innovation of this scale could impact your business in a positive way, I think is going to be challenging, because the businesses that are looking at it, understanding where the value is, understanding where the value isn't, and adopting things that are making their business more efficient, more effective, driving insight faster so that they can manage the business more effectively in real time, those are the businesses that are going to thrive in the decades ahead. The ones that are just sitting and waiting are the ones that are going to have a very hard time catching up to some of the early adopters of technology that are doing it in an appropriate way as they're adopting that technology.
And for businesses that have this concern, could you maybe speak specifically to Employment Hero's feature set and how you guys use AI within those features?
Yeah, because we work across the entire employee journey, everywhere from talent recruitment to hiring to performance management, all the way through to payroll. We have Hero AI that we've built natively that allows you to converse with the data that sits in your ecosystem. And so with Hero AI, you can start to ask questions across all of those different capabilities in the platform, which allows you to create more efficiency. We tend to see up to 80% efficiency gain when you're using one platform versus multiple disparate systems. And so our ability to wrap AI around all of those capabilities in the business drives even further value outside of just having a platform where there's one source of truth of data. Now you can interact with that data with more efficiency, and it allows you to drive your business forward in a more intelligent way.
Can you share a story of a business that saw a real measurable impact after adopting Employment Hero, one that's personally stuck with you?
Yeah, there's one. I live in Western Canada, in British Columbia. There's a business called Big Geo based out of Calgary. It's a technology company, rapidly growing. So they're hiring new headcount monthly, and they're onboarding new talent as the business is growing on the front end. That in itself is an exciting moment for a business, but it can also be challenging from an operations standpoint, especially when you're using multiple tools and multiple technology that doesn't speak to each other. And so onboarding Employment Hero, what they were able to do is streamline the business to a point where they were reducing the amount of time in their multiple platforms by 30 hours a week. And when you look at 30 hours a week, that's almost a full-time employee And it's not about, technology advancement and improvement and efficiency replacing employee. What it's doing is it's allowing you to free that individual up to help work on areas of the business that you can grow faster. So working with customers, working with the actual employees, employee engagement at a different level, rather than doing the administrative work of going in and out of multiple tools. And so that's just one example. Globally, we have 350,000 SMBs that work with us, which is millions of employees and billions in payroll that we process. So there are thousands of use cases that we've solved for the SMB space that allow that sort of efficiency to be realized in a very rapid manner once you onboard the platform.
Amazing. And is there something specifically on the roadmap right now that you're most excited about?
Yeah, there's probably two key pieces that we're adding to all of the capabilities that I've spoken to. One is Hero Force. One of the things about growing a business, and I'm very focused on Canadian growth, is you need to hire the best talent you can wherever they are, especially for certain industries. And so we've developed Hero Force that allows us to be the employment of record, so that you don't have to go through the complexity of setting up entities and paying payroll in foreign countries and what all that means to the business. So we reduce that operational burden to the business where we can employ that individual. You can use our platform, and it reduces the administrative headache and also the time it takes to understand how to operate with an employee that's not in the Canadian market. And so that's one area that I think is going to be very powerful in helping businesses stay in Canada, but grow and find the right talent to grow. The other aspect that I'm excited about is helping find talent for businesses. Because today you post a role on job sites, you get applications over a couple of weeks, and then you start to go through those applications. We're building a network of talent so that when you're posting a job, we might have 10 or 20 applicants that are a good fit immediately. And so part of that is building scale globally of what our talent pool is, but also building that talent pool in Canada as well, so that the talent attraction and the recruitment element of a business, which normally determines how fast you can grow or how fast you can solve a resource challenge in your business, if we can alleviate some of that issue along with all of the other elements we have, I think it would be a very powerful offering to help Canadian businesses grow faster.
Are there situations where Employment Hero might not be the right fit for a business?
Yeah, we're definitely not an enterprise platform. We're not focused on solving the problems of 10, 20,000 person organizations. We're really focused on solving the problem of, 50, 150, 250, 500 employee organizations in the Canadian marketplace in particular. And so one of the things about building technology that's purpose-built for Canada is there's different regulation and compliance at a provincial level. And so you need to make sure that we're building for the Canadian market. It's not a generic platform. It's a purpose-built platform for the Canadian marketplace. And it helps employees across the country from coast to coast to coast leverage one platform, but make it customized for where they're operating and where their employees are. And that our mission is to make employment easier for the SMB market, because it is, as I mentioned before, it's the backbone of the Canadian economy.
And generally, where do you see the market heading in 2026? Where do you see future development happening in AI, in HR, just generally within the space?
Yeah, I think you're going to start to see more and more vendors natively building AI features into some of their tools. I also think we're going to see the market mature in terms of where the value is from an HR standpoint, and quite honestly where the value isn't. And so you're going to start to see the maturity of the market in that way, and then you're going to start to see vendor relationships change where working across multiple systems is something that is not sustainable long term. And so there is going to be a movement towards consolidation of platforms, less fragmentation, because it makes the data more secure. It makes the data more centralized. You can utilize it better for some of the innovation that you have access to, but it also saves time. And any small business is trying to do more with less. That theme never goes away. And so if you can create less burdensome administration on the core elements of operating your business, that frees you up to spend more time growing the business, which is interacting with customers, focused on revenue growth, customer experience, and other aspects of the business, which truly is what drives the revenue in a business, that then creates the requirement to have to hire new team members. And so if you can make that administrative burden much less in the business and free up, in Big Geo's case, 30 hours a week, that's a lot of capacity that then you can add to the growth engine of the business.
So one concern we hear from people is that they're concerned the use of AI will take away from the customer experience. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think we all saw some of the poor AI usage in the market. AI slop was a term that was thrown around for a while, where content wasn't written in a natural way. You could tell that it wasn't a human that wrote it. When you're dealing with early chatbots and those sorts of interfaces, they put you in what they call doom loops, like you never got out of it and you couldn't solve your problem. And so that's one of the aspects of early adoption when you're doing it yourself with single point solutions. You can create a poor customer experience versus understanding where the value is for the business, short-term, long-term, and also you set a standard of what good looks like in your business. And so you don't adopt technology just because you can see that, there's going to be a 30% cost savings in an area. You also adopt it to make sure that it drives your business forward. And that lens is always the lens that the business owner needs to have in when and how they adopt technology. And in some cases, the early adopter stress tests the value of something, and the kind of laggard gets the benefit of the stress tested solution. I think the other aspect of that is when you're working with global tech companies that have, hundreds of thousands of customers, that process is natively happening for you versus you trying to figure that process out yourself. And so those are just, I think, some of the principles in how you would think about AI adoption, and also making sure that you keep customer experience in the forefront. Any business thrives by staying as close to your customer as you can, making sure you understand the jobs to be done of your customer, and then aligning your technology to that to make it as easy as possible to engage with you and deliver those jobs. And so that's the mission that we're on, to do it for HR, payroll, and the operating model of an SMB. And then I think when you look at other industries, I think that's a very similar theme of who's going to lead, in the next, 5 or 10 years.
For sure. And one thing I think that you brought up earlier, which was really interesting, was the idea that there are people in the workspace that are using AI to generate ideas for the business, but they're hiding it. That's a very sort of on the floor sort of approach. I guess my question is, when it comes to the use of AI in terms of facilitating workflow, which do you think is better? A top-down approach where management decides this is how we're using AI, this is the safest way to use AI, versus people within the company using AI to facilitate their own workflows? And if you have people on the floor using AI to facilitate workflow within smaller teams, then does that inherently come with the risk of data leak?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we're at a moment in time where we have both digital natives and digital laggards in a business, right? So a digital laggard is somebody who has had to learn technology as they've matured, and then the digital natives are people that just naturally grew up with it. And so people that naturally grow up with technology are much more they're less risk averse. And so they dive in, they test it out, they figure out what works, what doesn't work. They can identify when technology isn't great versus when it is. And I think we're finding this dynamic happening in the SMB space, where you have, in some cases, a digital native employee that's in the business that is leaning into the use of technology, and a business owner that potentially is not. And so that's where opening the dialogue is very critical. So as a business owner, I think a proactive thing that you could do is open the dialogue, bring your staff together, ask if they're using AI personally, what have they tested, where are they curious about where AI could impact their business. As a business owner, be transparent and say, I'm scared, or I'm fearful of what this could mean for the business. I don't know where there's value in the business, because you may have skill sets in your business that you didn't necessarily hire for that you now have in some of your team members. And so I think the dialogue is the first element of that. And then it's about sitting down and figuring out what's a good sandbox or testing ground to start to iterate in a low risk way in the business to see where there's value. and look out in the market to see what vendors that you have are starting to use AI in their core offerings and which ones aren't, because maybe you want to lean in to some of those vendors. I think the other aspect is going to be how you make sure that you can have something that's transparent, that you understand what's going on, and it's not making decisions for your business. You still want to make sure that human judgment is the driver of any innovation. And as long as the business owner and their team has a very clear framework that they're working against, and they're not deploying it widely in the business, but they're deploying it in smaller individual use cases that are less risky, then you can start to see where the value is going to be and how you would operationalize it in your business.
Yeah, you spoke earlier about the merits of testing within the sandbox. Can you speak more to that and how you envision that?
Yeah, for me, a sandbox can be defined in a few different ways. From a technology standpoint, a sandbox is a completely separate environment, right? Where it's not touching your systems or interacting. In some cases, it's synthetic data, it's not even real data. So you're kind of testing things in that sandbox concept. But you can also relate that to creating the right protocols and guidelines in your business, where you're trying to create a sandbox around where and how you're going to use AI to understand the impact of your business. And so I think that's the more practical use. An SMB is not going to work in a technology sandbox. What they're going to work is in their own sandbox that they create, which is using data that's not maybe private data. It's public information. They're using it to improve something that is highly manual in their business and fairly straightforward, so that you can figure out how you can create automation around something and what impact it will have. If you test it and you can figure out that it's saving 10 or 15 hours a week or a month in the business, that's something that you can dollarize and understand what value that can create for the business. And I think that is the more practical real world example of creating a sandbox for yourself. And it's about iterating on top of that. So you do something in a small scale that works, then you expand it. Now you pick the next use case, do it in a small environment. Maybe that one doesn't work. You pick use case 3, and then you start to stack all of this innovation on top of yourself. And when you look back a year or two later, you realize how much innovation you've driven in your own business.
This is all really interesting. So when we're speaking about people testing the use of AI on specific data sets, would you say that it is beneficial for companies to maybe have separate AI teams within the company, or would you say it should be more widespread?
Well, I think that is a nice to have. When you're talking about the SMB space, I don't think that's a resource necessarily that you would bring into the business early on. But I also think you can look at the types of roles you're hiring in your business and where maybe the AI value is sitting in your organization. And maybe you start to change what some of the job descriptions are of who you're looking for. Because if you can bring some of that value into your business, I think that's going to be long-term beneficial for you. There's also, as I mentioned before, vendors and other external parties that can help you at least get a foundation in place and then grow from there. But I also think it's a moment in time where you're kind of unlearning and relearning maybe what the operational model of your business could look like. Because as you're trying to do more with less and build a business, if you can reduce some of the hard costs in the business and some of the manual repetitive work in your business by using data, and data is not the solve for every single one of those examples, but it might be for 3 out of 7 or 4 out of 10. That's what innovation looks like. It's incrementally making the business more resilient and stronger by not using heavy resources to do things that are better done by a computer and or machine versus done by a human, and then uses human interaction and human resources in ways that add more value to your business.
That was very insightful. I think our listeners will get a lot out of this conversation. I feel like these are important subjects that people really do ask about a lot. I think that's all.
And I also think this is an evolution. You're not going to have all the answers right now, but I think it's important that we all talk about it and we show examples of where it's working and where it's not working, and that's how the industry starts to evolve and move along. And so we're hoping to do that a lot more in the Canadian market in the years ahead.
I think that's all the questions I had. Is there anything else specifically that you would like to speak to?
No, I think this is really about, for me, starting to open the dialogue around talking about some of these things that are talked about maybe behind closed doors in an office. They don't really know how to approach it. And this is a forum that we can start to talk about this openly and talk about how not only the vendor ecosystem is adapting and providing value to the SMB space, but also how SMBs can start to own this themselves and start to drive innovation inside their own businesses, and where those kind of two worlds come together. So thanks for having me today and speaking to it.
Of course, thank you for joining us.